Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, digitising discrimination. Kenya's High Court upholds a petition to put a new digital ID scheme on hold. Critics had accused it of discriminating against vulnerable communities. Also, there are worries that Somali troops are still far from ready to take over when the African Union pulls its 20,000 peacekeeping troops out of the country next year. Some critics already believe the move will be premature. And in Zamfara State, Nigeria, families that have mined for generations are being caught up in instability caused by clashes between local armed groups. But first, Kenya's High Court has ordered that a digital biometric registration system be suspended until the government's done more to guarantee the security of the data and make sure that there's no discrimination against minorities. The biometric ID number, called a Huduma number, would be used for everything from schools to voting. The database has been touted as a single source of truth, but millions, many from marginalised groups like Nubians, Somalis and Maasai, have struggled to get their ID numbers. Activists legally challenged the scheme, saying that it is unconstitutional, and petitioners have welcomed Thursday's judgment, but want the changes to go even further. Linda Bonyo is the founder of Lawyers Hub, which supported the challenge to Huduma Namba. Linda joined us now from Nairobi. Linda, thanks very much for speaking to us. First of all, just tell us a bit more about the judgment on Thursday. What did judges find in support of the concerns about the risks of the scheme as it currently stands?
Thank you very much. The judges acknowledged discrimination and said they acknowledge that this would maybe further divide marginalized communities such as the Nubians. The Nubian Rights Forum were petitioners in this case, and therefore that was recognized in the case. Two, they also spoke about the collection of DNA and GPS and indicated that collection of DNA and GPS should not proceed until we have that, and they call that intrusive. Said that's too intrusive to be collected by government, but they acknowledge the collection of biometric data in this particular case. They also acknowledge the gaps that still exist in Kenya around data protection and mentioned the OECD guidelines on data protection, which I think government needs to take up in order to bolster the data protection regime in Kenya.
What were the original concerns about the system? Why was it challenged in court in the first place?
The challenge that came from the Kenya Human Rights Commission was on discrimination under Article 27 of the Constitution of Kenya, and said that this would further divide communities that did not have, basic identity documentation, such as the Kenya ID. The Nubian Rights Forum saw it as a discrimination as well, because they represented members from border communities that still have an issue accessing IDs. In Kenya, for instance, there are buildings that you won't access unless you have a national identity card, and they thought this would further divide other communities. We also had issues on data protection and privacy, as at last year, before December, Kenya had no data protection law. This was only passed in December of last year and came into force on the 24th of November, 2019. Also, there was a concern on public participation because the law came in through an omnibus legislation, which just means a bulk legislation of parliament. So the concerns was that there was no public participation for citizens to give their opinion around this particular legislation. That and very many other exclusions amongst what the Law Society had.
So the judgment on Thursday has been welcomed, but there are more changes to the scheme that are wanted. What happens now?
I think what happens next depends on the parties. Every party is sort of seeing it as a win, because if you read we haven't read the judgment, that will be provided next week. But from the sound of the judges, it means that anybody who's aggrieved, especially the petitioners, they're able to appeal to the Court of Appeal. So I see an appeal in the next few days after the judgment is out. But on the government side, I also see a justification. They would obviously table a digital identity bill in Parliament because they are now told they cannot proceed unless we have good regulations in place. That is I think the opinion I expect from both sides of the divide to come in place. For civil society, there's already a press conference by the Kenya Human Rights Commission that's happening tomorrow, and I think we'll be able to get more direction from that.
Thanks very much. Linda Bonio there from the Lawyers Hub in Kenya. Well, Kenya does seem to be shielded from the global economic downturn. Its economy is expected to grow 6.2%, up from 5.7% last year. Its central bank expects that growth to be supported by recovering agriculture, medium and small businesses, and robust private sector growth. Kenya's is East Africa's richest economy. Now, there are worries that Somali troops are still far from ready to take over when the African Union pulls its 20,000 peacekeeping troops out of the country next year. Some critics already believe that the move will be premature. The country is still regularly hit by fatal jihadist attacks from al-Shabaab extremists. Nicola Shema tells us more.
The men in blue tracksuits are members of the Somali army. They are being trained by Ugandan soldiers from AMISOM, the African Union mission in Somalia. AMISOM arrived here in 2007 to help fight jihadist group al-Shabaab. Today, AMISOM has 20,000 troops on the ground. The mission is expected to leave next year. But al-Shabaab are still operational, and some believe the force should stay longer.
If it is done in a rush, and the conditions are, the right conditions have not been created, certainly, our concern would be that the gains that have been made over time are lost. That what all these efforts and sacrifices made come to naught.
Many Somalis agree with the AMISOM official.
If AMISOM leaves, we think they'll be fighting. A lot of lives will be lost.
AMISOM has police officers and soldiers. The soldiers come from 5 countries: Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya and Uganda. Uganda's ambassador in Somalia believes al-Shabaab are eagerly awaiting AMISOM's departure.
The moment you say AMISOM is going, before AMISOM gets out, all of them will be out. Just expect that. No doubt. You go build bigger walls and bigger fences because they already know the way. So they will come in waves.
In 2011, AMISOM pushed al-Shabaab out of Mogadishu, but since then they have carried out many sporadic attacks. One of them took place last month. It left more than 80 people dead. And many feel the Somali National Army is far from ready to replace AMISOM.
Families that have mined gold in northwestern Nigeria for generations are being caught up in instability caused by clashes between local armed groups. Last April, the government tried to ban mining in a bid to restrict battling for natural resources, but in Zamfara state, it is one of the only viable livelihoods left. Take a look.
Zamfara State is one of Nigeria's richest areas in terms of mineral wealth. And yet, the people here in the country's northwest are among its poorest. Mining is one of the few reliable sources of income, but it's high-risk work that brings scant reward. These workers earn just a couple of dollars a day.
I need this work to survive, as I couldn't find any jobs in town.
Mines are such a key part of the local economy that armed groups terrorize the region in an unceasing fight over natural resources. And the miners are their target. In exchange for being allowed to continue their trade, so-called bandits force them to share their profits and to do their bidding. Last year, the Nigerian government introduced a regional ban on mining, hoping to curb the armed groups, but people have carried on regardless. As well as working illegally, gold miners also run the risk of lead poisoning. This toxic metal is abundant in the earth of Zamfara. Its vapors escape into the air during mining, often near residential areas. Each week, this clinic treats children suffering from its effects. In some patients, the levels of lead in the blood are 250 times higher than the limit tolerated by many doctors.
The way to address this once and for all is to ensure, again, that exposure is completely curtailed. No residential activity when it comes to mineral processing, and that all the miners that are mining should practice good hygiene, occupational hygiene, and industrial hygiene, and better mining practices.
In the past decade, more than 500 children have died from lead poisoning. Though officially banned, mining looks set to remain a vital part of this region's economy. And much more remains to be done to regulate safety standards in the industry and to end the ongoing conflict surrounding access to the mines.
And finally, one of my favourite bands have been snapped up by Universal. Kenya's Sauti Sol have signed with the LA-based music group. It is the world's biggest music company and could give the African stars a boost to global audiences. But viewers of Eye on Africa will already know that I am a big fan. I went full-on starry-eyed when the guys were on last year. And I would like to think that maybe that had something to do with their move to Universal, but maybe not. Either way, we are looking forward to more big things from Sauti Sol. And for now, I'll leave you with the sounds of the guys.
I don't want this night to end before you know I need you. Na muda usini hisia nikwambie I love you. I don't want this night to end before you know I need you. So I'ma keep it short and sweet. DJ play the song on repeat. Odi dance to the beat. Hapo lipo kama tana feel so sweet. Hapo lipo kama tana feel